The bidding room went quiet the moment the auctioneer laughed. I remember that laugh better than I remember my own name that day. It was short, dry, and aimed straight at me. Every alien buyer in that room turned to look at the human standing near the back with grease still under his fingernails. That human was me, Dax Marin, station janitor, nobody important. I was not supposed to be bidding on anything. I had come to the scrapyard auction on Kessa's Drift to watch, because watching was free, and my shift did not start for another 2 hours. The item up for sale was listed as Hull Unit 441, condition unknown, sold as is, no warranty, no history. The picture on the screen showed a broken, blackened shape half buried in rust, sitting in a junk field on the edge of the station like a tooth someone forgot to pull. Nobody wanted it. The other bidders, tall insect-like traders from the Corvi cluster, and a pair of silver-skinned brokers from Threll, barely glanced at the image before going back to their conversations. One of them said something in his own language that made his friend laugh, and I did not need a translator to understand the tone. They thought it was junk, worse than junk. They thought it was human junk, and to most of the galaxy, that was the lowest kind there was. I do not know what made me raise my hand. Maybe it was hearing that laugh. Maybe it was 3 years of mopping floors for people who looked through me like I was part of the equipment. Whatever it was, my hand went up before my brain caught up with it, and I heard my own voice say a number that used up almost every credit I had saved in my life. The auctioneer blinked at me, checked his screen twice, and then shrugged. Sold to the human. Nobody clapped. Nobody cared. The Corvi traders were already talking about the next lot before my number even finished flashing on the board. I walked out of that room holding a slip of paper that said I now legally owned a piece of scrap metal, and I felt like the biggest fool on the entire station. My friend Talia Wren met me outside the auction hall. She worked in the same maintenance crew as me, fixing air filters and hauling waste containers, and she had the kind of face that always looked like it was about to ask you if you had lost your mind. "You bought what?" she said. "A ship," I said. "An old one." She looked at the slip in my hand, then back at me, then laughed the same way the room had laughed. "Dax," she said, "that is not a ship. That is a grave with wings." She was not wrong to think that. Nobody had flown that wreck in longer than either of us had been alive. It had been sitting in that junk field for as long as anyone on the station could remember, and station records listed it only as unclaimed derelict, human origin, non-functional. Even the word human origin did not mean much anymore. My people had not built anything new in the stars for a long time. We kept to our small colonies and our small jobs, and everyone else in the galaxy had stopped expecting anything else from us. I told myself I had bought it for the metal. Old human alloys still had some value if you knew who to sell them to, and I figured I could strip the hull for parts and maybe make back a fraction of what I had spent. That was the plan. A boring, sensible plan for a boring, sensible janitor. It took me 2 days to get transport clearance and tow the wreck to an empty maintenance bay near the edge of the station, the kind of bay nobody used because the docking clamps were old and the lights barely worked. I stood in front of it for a long time before I ever went inside. Up close, it was bigger than I expected. The pictures had made it look small and broken, but standing beneath it, I had to tilt my head all the way back just to see where the hull curved out of sight. Deep scorch marks ran along one side like old scars that had never healed properly. Half the exterior plating was gone, stripped by scavengers long before me, but underneath the damage, I could see something the auction photos had not shown clearly. The metal was thick, really thick, thicker than anything I had ever seen on a civilian hauler or a station shuttle. I told myself that did not mean anything. Old ships were built heavy, that was all. The entry hatch was jammed, and it took me almost an hour with a pry bar and language I am not proud of to force it open. Dust and stale air rolled out to meet me, along with a darkness that swallowed the light from my handheld lamp before it traveled more than a few steps. I climbed inside anyway. The corridor beyond the hatch was tall enough that I did not have to duck, which struck me as strange for what was supposed to be a small derelict. My lamp beam slid over walls lined with dead panels and dark conduits, everything covered in a fine gray dust that had not been disturbed in what felt like forever. My footsteps echoed longer than they should have, bouncing down passageways that seemed to keep going further than the outside of the ship suggested was possible. I told myself it was just an old cargo layout, big empty holds, nothing more. I found what looked like a central chamber after maybe 20 minutes of walking, a round room with a raised platform in the middle, and dead screens curving along every wall. It looked like a command deck from some old recording, the kind of thing you might see in a history document about the early days before my species stopped reaching for the stars. I placed my hand on the edge of the platform, mostly out of curiosity, and felt a strange warmth under the dust, like something underneath was not entirely dead. Then every light in the room came on at once. I do not know how to describe what that felt like. One moment I was standing in near total darkness with a dying lamp in my hand, and the next, soft white light filled the chamber from panels I would have sworn were broken beyond repair. Screens flickered to life around me, filled with symbols and diagrams scrolling too fast to read. The floor beneath my boots gave the faintest hum, like something enormous was waking up after a very long sleep. I stumbled back from the platform, my heart slamming against my ribs, and a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was calm, clear, and carried a strange kind of patience that made it sound like it had been waiting a very long time to speak again. "Captain on the bridge," the voice said. I froze completely. I looked around the empty chamber, searching for someone, anyone, who the voice could possibly be talking to. There was no one there but me. "I am not a captain," I said out loud, feeling ridiculous for talking to an empty room. "I am a janitor." There was a pause, the kind of pause that felt almost thoughtful, before the voice answered again. "Command authority has been transferred to the registered owner of this vessel," it said. "Biometric confirmation complete. Welcome aboard." My legs went weak enough that I had to sit down right there on the cold floor. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. Another pause, longer this time. "That information is restricted," the voice said. "Clearance insufficient." I laughed, a shaky, disbelieving sound that echoed strangely around the chamber. I had bought this wreck for scrap value, expecting to spend a few weeks tearing it apart for parts to sell. Instead, I was sitting on the floor of a ship that apparently still had a working mind inside it, a mind that did not even trust me enough to tell me its own name. I looked up at the dark screen slowly filling with light around me, at the shape of a command chamber built for a crew far larger than one tired station janitor, and a small, cold feeling settled into my chest. It was not fear exactly. It was closer to the feeling you get standing at the edge of something much bigger than yourself, right before you decide whether to step back or step forward. I do not know how long I sat there before I finally spoke again. "Show me what you can," I said. "Whatever you are allowed to show me." The lights dimmed slightly, and one screen near the platform brightened, displaying a single word in faded, half-corrupted lettering, a name that meant nothing to me yet, but would soon mean everything. I stared at it for a long time, not understanding what I was looking at, only knowing with absolute certainty that I had not bought scrap metal at all. Whatever this ship had been, it was not finished yet, and somehow, impossibly, neither was I. I did not sleep that night. I sat on a cold bench near the platform with my back against a cracked panel, staring up at that half-corrupted name until the letters stopped making sense and started looking like scratches. Somewhere around the middle of the night, the voice spoke again, without me asking it anything. "You have questions," it said. "I have about 1,000, I said. "Start anywhere." "You may call me Arbiter," the voice said. "It is not my full designation, but it is the part I am permitted to share at this clearance level." "Arbiter," I repeated, testing the word. "Fine. Arbiter. What happened to this ship?" There was a pause long enough that I thought the system might have frozen again. "That information is restricted," Arbiter said. I rubbed my eyes. "Everything is restricted," I said. "You told me a name I cannot even read properly, and now you are telling me I cannot know anything else. What good is any of this?" "Restricted does not mean absent," Arbiter said. "It means locked. Locks can be opened. This vessel suffered significant damage to command-level memory during its final engagement. Some records exist only in fragments. Others require authorization I no longer possess the ability to verify remotely. I sat up a little straighter. What kind of authorization? Captain-level biometric confirmation across multiple systems, Arbiter said. Engine core, weapons control, historical archive. You have already unlocked the bridge. The rest will require you to move through the ship and interact directly with each system in person. I looked down the dark corridor leading away from the chamber, thinking about how long it had taken me just to get from the entry hatch to this room, and how much larger the ship clearly was than that single walk had shown me. How big is this ship? I asked. Larger than standard civilian scrap classification would suggest, Arbiter said, which was about as close to a joke as I would ever hear that voice make. I spent the next several days doing something I never expected to do with my life. I explored my own ship, one corridor at a time, carrying a portable lamp and a growing list of questions that kept multiplying faster than Arbiter could answer them. Every new section I found made less sense against the idea that this had ever been listed as scrap. I found a hold large enough to park a dozen station shuttles inside it, with mounting racks along the walls built for machines I did not recognize. I found sealed doors marked with symbols in old military script, the kind of formal lettering nobody used anymore outside of history archives. I found a long, narrow chamber lined with tubes and couplings that Arbiter refused to explain, except to say that section required a higher clearance than I currently held. The strangest part was not any single room, it was the pattern underneath all of it. Nothing about this ship matched the profile of anything built for hauling cargo or ferrying passengers. Every hallway was reinforced. Every door was heavier than it needed to be. Every system, even the ones with no power left in them, had backup systems behind the backup systems. On the fourth day, I found the crew quarters. They were empty, of course, stripped bare by time and scavengers long before I arrived, but the shape of the rooms told their own story. Rows and rows of small sleeping berths, hundreds of them, stretching down corridors that seemed to go on without end. I stood in the middle of one long hallway of empty rooms and felt something heavy settle over me that had nothing to do with dust or old air. Arbiter, I said quietly, how many people used to live on this ship? Full crew complement was 6,200, Arbiter said. I nearly dropped my lamp. 6,000, I repeated. This was not some patrol boat. This was a small city. This vessel was designed for extended independent operation far from support, Arbiter said. It required a full complement to function at capacity across all systems simultaneously. I sat down right there in the empty hallway, surrounded by hundreds of small dark rooms that had once held a small city of human lives, and tried to imagine what kind of conflict required a ship this size, carrying this many people, built with this much redundancy in every system. I did not have to imagine for long. 2 days later, I found the log archive. It was buried 3 decks below the bridge, behind a door that took me almost a full day to force open, using tools I borrowed, and one favor I owed Talia for the rest of my life. Inside was a small room lined with storage cores, most of them dark and dead, but a few still holding a faint glow of stored power. Arbiter, can you read these? I asked. Partially, the voice said. Significant corruption is present. I can recover fragments only. Show me whatever you can, I said. The nearest screen flickered to life, and for the first time since I had stepped aboard, I heard something other than Arbiter's calm, careful voice. It was a recording, badly damaged, full of static and gaps, but underneath the noise I could hear a human voice speaking in short, clipped phrases, the kind of voice people use when they know they might not get another chance to speak. I could not make out most of the words. The recording cut in and out, swallowing whole sentences into static, but a few phrases came through clearly enough to freeze me in place. Words like hold the line, words like get them out first, words like whatever happens to us, they cannot be allowed to reach the colonies. The recording ended abruptly, cutting to silence so sudden it felt like a physical blow. Arbiter, I said, my voice not quite steady anymore. What was that recording from? Final command log. Partial recovery only, Arbiter said. Timestamp corresponds to the closing hours of what your species records refer to as the Silence Wars. I knew that name. Everyone in the galaxy knew that name, even people like me who had never cared much for history. The Silence Wars were the reason humanity kept to its small colonies now, the reason we had stopped reaching for the stars, the reason species like the Corvi traders laughed when a human raised his hand at an auction. Officially, humanity had been decisively defeated in that conflict. Our expansion ended, our ambitions crushed by forces too advanced for us to match. Officially, our flagship, the pride of our entire fleet, had been destroyed in the final battle with everyone aboard. I looked at the dark storage cores around me, at the faint glow still clinging to a few of them, and felt my stomach turn over slowly. Arbiter, I said carefully, what is this ship's name? I do not have full authorization to answer that question at this time, Arbiter said. Then tell me what you do have authorization to say, I said. Anything, please. There was a pause, longer than any before it, as if something inside that old, patient mind was weighing a decision it had been unable to make for a very long time. This vessel was present at the final engagement of the Silence Wars, Arbiter finally said. Official historical record states this vessel was destroyed during that engagement, with the loss of all personnel aboard. I felt the cold feeling from that first night return, stronger now, settling deep into my chest. But you are still here, I said slowly. You are still working. That means the record is wrong. Arbiter did not answer right away, and when it finally did, its voice carried something I had not heard in it before, something that almost sounded like relief at finally being allowed to say even this much. Yes, it said simply. The record is incomplete. I sat there in that small dark room, surrounded by broken storage cores holding the last fragmented words of people who had died defending something, and realized that whatever I had actually bought at that auction, it was not scrap metal, and it was not simply an old ship. It was a secret. A very large, very dangerous secret, and apparently, whether I wanted it or not, it now belonged to me. Word does not stay quiet for long on a station as small as Kessa's Drift, and mine did not stay quiet either. It started the way these things always start, with a joke passed between dock workers on a slow shift. Did you hear? Someone said. The janitor bought himself a real warship. The joke traveled faster than I could have imagined, moving from maintenance crews to cargo handlers to the traders who ran the small shops near the docking rings, each retelling adding a little more exaggeration until the story barely resembled what had actually happened. By the end of that first week, people who had never spoken to me before were suddenly very interested in saying hello. Some of it was harmless curiosity. Station workers who had watched me push a cleaning cart through the same corridors for years now stopped to ask if it was true, if I had really bought an old military hull, if it really still had power. I kept my answers short and vague, partly because I did not fully understand what I was dealing with myself, and partly because some instinct kept warning me not to say too much to anyone I did not trust completely. Not everyone who came asking questions was harmless. The first sign of real trouble came from a broker named Callan Voss, a smooth-talking human trader who ran one of the parts shops near the lower docking ring. Callan had never given me the time of day before, but he found me during a supply run and offered, with a friendly smile that did not reach his eyes, to buy the wreck off me for triple what I had paid at auction. I told him it was not for sale. He raised the offer twice more over the next 2 days, each time framing it like he was doing me a favor, warning me that old hulls like that sometimes had hidden problems that could get an unlicensed owner into serious trouble with station authorities. I kept declining, and each time I did, his friendly smile got a little thinner. Arbiter, when I mentioned the offers, went quiet for a moment before responding. That individual has made 3 inquiries to station registry regarding this vessel's classification status in the past 2 days, Arbiter said. I recommend caution. How do you know that? I asked. I retain limited access to station registry logs through legacy docking protocols, Arbiter said. This vessel was never fully removed from certain older networks. That was the first time I understood that Arbiter was not only waking up inside the ship, it was also quietly watching everything happening around it, and it did not like what it was seeing. The bigger trouble came from someone who was not human at all. Her name was Mira Voss, and despite sharing a surname with the broker who kept pestering me, the two were not related, a coincidence she found more amusing than I did the first time she mentioned it. Mira was a xenoarchivist, a researcher who collected and studied old historical records from conflicts across the galaxy, and she reached out to me through a formal message routed through the station's public registry office rather than approaching me directly on the docks. The message was polite, careful, and clearly written by someone who had spent a long time choosing her words. She explained that she had heard about my acquisition through professional channels that tracked unusual hull registrations, and she asked, very respectfully, if I would be willing to meet and discuss what I had found. I almost deleted the message. Then I thought about Callan Voss and his thin, hungry smile, and decided that talking to someone who at least asked permission might be worth the risk. We met in a small public cafe near the upper observation deck, a place with wide windows looking out over the slow-turning shape of Kessa's drift station and the dark scatter of stars beyond it. Mira turned out to be a tall, pale-skinned woman with sharp eyes and a calm, careful way of speaking, the kind of person who chose every word like she was placing pieces on a board. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, once we had both sat down. "I know this must feel strange, being approached like this." "Strange does not begin to cover the last 2 weeks of my life," I said. She smiled slightly at that, then folded her hands on the table and got straight to the point. "I study historical records from the Silence Wars," she said. "Specifically, records related to the final engagement. I have spent almost 10 years trying to find hard evidence about what actually happened during that battle, because the official version has never fully made sense to me. I kept my face as still as I could. What do you mean, the official version? Every galactic record states that humanity's flagship was destroyed in that battle, along with its entire crew," she said. "It is treated as settled history, a closed case. But closed cases do not usually leave this many unanswered questions behind them." She reached into a small bag and set a data slate on the table between us, then activated it, bringing up a series of old documents, damaged sensor logs, and second-hand reports from ships that had supposedly witnessed the flagship's destruction from a distance. "Every single witness account describes something slightly different," she said. "Some say the ship was destroyed by direct assault. Others describe an explosion so massive it could not have left any debris behind for later recovery teams to find. A few describe something else entirely. A ship that simply vanished from every sensor at once, in a way that does not match any known weapon of that era. I thought about the dark, empty corridors of my ship, about the thick armor plating and the endless redundant systems, about a recording that spoke of getting people out before anything else, and felt a chill crawl up the back of my neck. "You think it did not actually get destroyed?" I said quietly. "I think," Mira said, choosing her words with obvious care, "that someone decided a defeated humanity was more useful to certain powerful interests than a humanity that had won, or worse, a humanity that had chosen to disappear rather than be controlled. A story about a mighty flagship destroyed in battle is a story about weakness, a story about a flagship that vanished on purpose. Protecting something important is a very different kind of story, one that some people would prefer nobody ever heard." I sat there in that quiet cafe, looking out at the stars through the wide window, thinking about 6,000 empty berths and a half-corrupted name I still could not fully read, and I understood, for the first time, that I had not stumbled onto some forgotten piece of scrap. I had stumbled onto a hole in the story the entire galaxy believed about my own species, and somebody out there had worked very hard to keep that hole from ever being found. "Arbiter," I said quietly, once I was back inside the ship and alone again in the dark bridge. "Did you hear any of that?" "I did," the voice answered. "Through the station's public network while your communicator remained active." "Is she right?" I asked. Did we not actually lose that war? Arbiter was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I began to wonder if it would refuse to answer at all, the way it had refused so many times before. I am not authorized to confirm or deny the outcome of that engagement at your current clearance level, it finally said. I let out a long, frustrated breath. Then how do I get higher clearance? I asked. By continuing to restore what remains of this vessel's core systems, Arbiter said. Full authorization requires full activation. You have only begun. I looked around the dark, half-awake bridge, at screens still flickering with half-formed diagrams, at a ship built for 6,000 people, now standing empty except for one tired janitor who had bought it on a whim, and felt something shift inside me that had nothing to do with fear anymore. Then let us begin properly, I said. Show me everything you can, one system at a time. I am not selling this ship for parts. Not anymore. For the first time since I had stepped aboard, Arbiter's voice carried something that almost sounded like approval. Understood, Captain, it said, beginning full restoration sequence. Somewhere deep in the ship, far below the bridge, I heard a low sound I had not heard before, a distant hum growing slowly stronger, like something enormous taking its first real breath in a very long time. The restoration sequence did not happen quickly, and it did not happen the way I expected. I had pictured something like a switch being thrown, lights blazing on everywhere at once, engines roaring back to life in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it was slow, careful, almost stubborn work, the kind of work that suited me better than I would have guessed. Arbiter explained early on that most of the ship's higher systems were locked behind physical failsafes, old-fashioned mechanical backups installed for exactly this kind of situation, when power was low and trust could not be placed entirely in software alone. That meant most of my early progress came not from typing commands into a console, but from crawling through access shafts, replacing burned-out relays by hand, and clearing decades of dust and grit from moving parts that had not moved in longer than I had been alive. It was, in other words, cleaning, just on a much bigger and much stranger scale than I was used to. I found that funny the first time it occurred to me, sitting inside a cramped conduit shaft with grease on my hands and sweat running down my back. Every alien on this station had laughed at humans for being unskilled labor, good only for scrubbing floors and hauling trash. Here I was, doing exactly that kind of work, and it was the only reason this legendary ship had any chance of waking up at all. Arbiter could guide me through diagrams and warn me about dangerous power feeds, but it could not physically reach into a narrow shaft and reset a corroded relay. Only hands could do that, my hands. You are doing well, Arbiter told me one evening, after I had finally cleared a stubborn blockage in what it called the secondary power distribution trunk. Most modern technicians would have required specialized robotic tools for that task. Most modern technicians probably never spent 3 years crawling through station ductwork fixing broken filtration units, I said, wiping grease off my hands with a rag that had seen better days. Turns out that kind of experience is good for something after all. It is good for a great deal more than you may realize, Arbiter said, and something about the way it said that made me pause and wonder exactly what it meant. Days turned into weeks. I kept my station job at first, mostly because I still needed the credits to buy replacement parts and pay off the growing list of favors I owed Talia, but every free hour went straight into the ship. Slowly, section by section, more of it came alive around me. Lights that had been dark for a generation began holding steady. Doors that had been frozen shut slid open smoothly again. The low hum I had first heard deep in the ship grew steadier, less like a struggling breath, and more like a heartbeat finding its proper rhythm. Mira Voss became a regular visitor during this time, though never inside the ship itself. I was not ready to let anyone else aboard yet, not even someone who seemed to want the truth as badly as I did. Instead, we kept meeting at that same small cafe near the observation deck, trading information back and forth like careful traders, neither of whom fully trusted the other yet, even as something like real trust slowly began to grow between us. She brought old records, damaged sensor logs, faded testimonies from soldiers and officers who had served during the final years of the Silence Wars. I brought pieces of what Arbiter allowed me to share, carefully filtered through what my rising clearance level actually permitted, which was still frustratingly little. It was during one of these meetings that Mira told me something that changed the shape of everything I thought I understood. The Silence Wars were not fought over territory, she said, sliding her data slate across the table toward me. Not primarily. They were fought over a discovery, something humanity found roughly 40 years before the war began, out past the edge of what was then considered explored space. What kind of discovery? I asked. She hesitated, the first time I had seen her hesitate about anything. The records are fragmented, and much of what remains has been heavily edited by parties who had every reason to keep the truth buried, she said. But from what I have managed to piece together, humanity discovered something that several other major powers believed should never have been found by a species as young as yours. Some kind of technology, or perhaps knowledge, that could have shifted the balance of power across a significant portion of the galaxy. I sat back slowly, and the war started because of that. I believe so, she said. I believe several powers who feared what humanity might do with that discovery formed a coalition specifically to stop your species from developing it further, whatever it was. That coalition became what the official records now simply call the opposing forces of the Silence Wars. And we lost, I said. That is what every official record states, Mira said carefully. But if that flagship out there is truly what I believe it is, then I do not think your species lost at all. I think something else happened. Something that required your people to disappear rather than surrender. I thought about the recording Arbiter had shown me weeks earlier, that damaged, static-filled voice speaking about getting people out first, about not letting something reach the colonies. I thought about 6,000 empty berths and a name I still could not fully read, and a slow, uncomfortable idea began forming in the back of my mind. Arbiter, I said later that night, once I was back aboard and alone in the quiet bridge. Do you know anything about a discovery humanity made before the Silence Wars began? Something other powers were afraid of. The pause before Arbiter answered was longer than any pause before it. That information falls under the highest classification level this vessel maintains, it finally said. I am not authorized to discuss it at your current clearance. Then how do I get that clearance? I asked, my patience wearing thin after weeks of careful, incremental progress. Full command authorization requires successful activation of this vessel's primary core system, Arbiter said. That system remains offline. Restoring it will require significantly more extensive repair than anything completed so far, and it will not go unnoticed. Unnoticed by who? I asked. By anyone still watching for signs that this vessel might one day wake up fully, Arbiter said. I did not like the sound of that, and within a few days, I understood exactly what it meant. It started small. A supply order I placed for replacement conduit parts through a station vendor got mysteriously delayed, then canceled outright, with no explanation given. When I went to the vendor directly, the shopkeeper, a nervous-looking Threll trader who had always been friendly with me before, refused to meet my eyes and mumbled something about a change in inventory policy that clearly was not true. Then my access to certain maintenance bay logs, records I needed to track power output during the restoration, simply stopped updating, as if someone with higher authority than mine had quietly locked me out. Arbiter noticed the pattern before I fully understood what was happening. Someone with meaningful influence over station infrastructure is actively working to slow your progress, it told me one evening. This suggests awareness of this vessel's true nature at a level beyond casual curiosity. Who would even know enough to care that much? I asked. I cannot answer with certainty, Arbiter said, but I would advise increased caution regarding any individual who has shown unusual interest in this vessel's ownership or history. I thought immediately of Callan Voss, with his persistent offers and his suspiciously specific registry inquiries, but something told me he was not working alone, and probably was not the one truly in charge of whatever was happening. I found out exactly how right that instinct was a few nights later, when I nearly did not survive walking back to the maintenance bay. I had stayed late working on a stubborn coolant system deep in the ship's lower decks, and I left later than usual, tired enough that I was not paying close attention to the mostly empty corridors of the station at that hour. I was 3 turns away from the bay entrance when I noticed a figure step out from a side passage ahead of me, followed a moment later by a second figure emerging from behind. I recognized neither of them, but I recognized the posture immediately. It was the posture of people who had planned exactly where to stand and exactly when to move. "Can I help you?" I said, trying to keep my voice steadier than I felt. The nearest figure, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and cold, careful eyes, did not answer right away. Instead, he glanced past me, toward the direction of the maintenance bay, in a way that made my stomach drop. "You should sell the ship," he finally said. "Save yourself a lot of trouble." "I do not want trouble," I said carefully. "I just want to be left alone to fix what I bought." "That is not going to happen," the second figure said, stepping a little closer. "Some things are better left broken." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears, and for one long moment, I genuinely believed something bad was about to happen to me in that empty corridor. Then, unexpectedly, a station security drone rounded the corner behind them, its patrol light sweeping automatically across the passage, and both figures immediately straightened up and walked past me without another word, disappearing around the next corner like they had never been there at all. I stood frozen for a long moment before my legs finally agreed to move again, and I did not stop walking until I was safely back inside the ship, with the hatch sealed behind me. "Arbiter," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "I think someone just tried to warn me off in a way that was not really a warning at all." "I detected an unregistered communication burst near your location approximately 6 minutes before that encounter," Arbiter said. "It appears someone was tracking your movements through the station in real time." "That is not comforting," I said. "It is not intended to be comforting," Arbiter said. "It is intended to inform your next decision." I sat down hard on the bridge floor, my hands still not quite steady, and thought about walking away from all of this. Selling the ship, even at a loss, just to make the danger disappear. It would have been the sensible thing to do, the safe thing. Instead, I thought about 6,000 empty berths, about a static-filled voice pleading for people to be gotten out first, about a species that had spent a generation believing it had failed, when maybe, just maybe, it had actually chosen something far braver instead. "Arbiter," I said finally, "whatever is locked behind that core system, whatever truth is hiding in this ship, I want it found, not just for me, for everyone who still thinks we lost." There was a pause, and then Arbiter's voice returned, steadier and somehow warmer than I had heard it before. "Then we should begin immediately," it said. "The core restoration will require access to the deepest section of this vessel, a section that has remained fully sealed since the day this ship went dark. I must warn you, Captain, that whatever we find there may not be easy to hear. I have already stopped expecting easy," I said, getting back to my feet. "Show me the way." The deepest section of the ship lay far below every deck I had explored so far, reachable only through a long vertical shaft that Arbiter guided me down using an old maintenance lift barely holding together after so many years without use. The air grew colder the further down we went, and the walls here were different from the rest of the ship, thicker, darker, built with a kind of seriousness that made even the reinforced corridors above feel almost casual by comparison. At the bottom of the shaft stood a single door, larger than any other I had encountered aboard, sealed with a mechanism unlike anything else on the ship. Arbiter explained that this was the vessel's primary core chamber, the heart of every major system, and that opening it fully would require not just physical repair, but a final biometric confirmation directly at the source. "This is the last lock," Arbiter said, as I stood before that massive door with my hand resting against its cold surface. "Beyond it lies both the power to fully restore this vessel and the truth you have been searching for. Once opened, both cannot be easily hidden again." I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of that choice settle fully onto my shoulders for the first time. "Open it," I said. "Whatever the truth turns out to be, we already have to live with the lie. I would rather live with the truth instead." The door responded to my voice and my touch together, ancient mechanisms grinding slowly to life after their long silence. And as it began to open, a wave of cold air rolled out to meet me, carrying with it a soft golden light from somewhere deep inside, like the ship itself had been holding its breath, waiting all this time for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to finally ask it to speak. Inside the core chamber, the air felt different from anywhere else on the ship, warmer despite the cold draft, alive in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. A single column rose from the center of the room, glowing faintly gold, surrounded by rings of quiet machinery that hummed at a pitch just low enough to feel in my chest rather than hear with my ears. "Place your hand on the column," Arbiter said softly. "This will complete the final authorization." I stepped forward and pressed my palm against the warm surface, and the light around me brightened all at once, filling the chamber with a soft golden glow that made the whole room feel less like a machine and more like something almost alive. "Command authorization complete," Arbiter said, and for the first time since I had stepped aboard, its voice carried something that sounded almost like emotion. "Full system access granted. Historical archive unlocked. Captain, before I show you what remains, I must tell you something important. My memory of the final battle is not simply damaged, it was deliberately fragmented by my own command crew, as a final act of protection, in case this vessel was ever recovered by the wrong hands." "Why would they do that?" I asked. "Because what we protected that day was worth more than this ship, more than the crew who died defending it, and possibly more than the reputation of your entire species for a generation," Arbiter said. "They chose to let humanity be remembered as defeated, rather than risk that discovery falling into hands that would use it to dominate rather than protect." The chamber's screens flickered, and slowly, piece by piece, fragmented memories began playing across them, images and voices recovered at last from their long burial. I watched, transfixed, as the true shape of that final battle unfolded before me. Humanity had not been losing that war. According to the recovered logs, our fleet had actually been holding its ground against the coalition forces for months, buying time for something far more important happening far behind the front lines. The discovery Mira had spoken of, whatever it truly was, had been found to be dangerous beyond anything anyone had expected, capable of reshaping entire star systems if placed in reckless hands. Rather than risk it being seized by any side, including our own, in a moment of desperation or ambition, the flagship's command crew made a final decision. They would remove it from the battle entirely, vanish with it beyond any sensor's reach, and let the galaxy believe humanity had been crushed, rather than let anyone learn what we had chosen to protect and how far we had gone to protect it. I watched the final recovered log entry play out on the screen before me, a man in a captain's uniform, exhausted, his voice steady despite everything, giving the order to activate a system that would carry the ship beyond detection entirely. "Get everyone below decks secured," he said. "We disappear together, or not at all." The recording ended, and the chamber fell silent except for the steady hum of the column beside me. "Arbiter," I said quietly, "what happened after that order was given?" "The vessel successfully evaded detection using the very technology it carried," Arbiter said. "However, sustained damage from the battle prevented a full return to human space. This vessel drifted for many years afterward, crew slowly succumbing to failing life support, until only automated systems remained functional. Eventually, this vessel was recovered by salvage operations and classified, incorrectly, as an unremarkable derelict." I sat down heavily on the edge of the platform, absorbing everything I had just seen and heard. My people had not lost that war. We had made an impossible choice, sacrificing our reputation, our expansion, our place among the stars, to keep something dangerous out of reckless hands, and every single soul aboard this ship had paid the price for that choice with their lives. And nobody, not one person outside a handful of old, guilty conspirators, had ever known the truth. I do not have much time to sit with that discovery, because barely an hour after the core chamber fully activated, alarms began sounding throughout the ship for the first time since I had come aboard. "Arbiter, what is happening?" I said, scrambling back toward the lift. Unauthorized vessels approaching this maintenance bay, Arbiter said, its voice sharpening with sudden urgency. 3 ships, non-station registered, weapon systems active. They appear to be moving directly toward our position. My stomach dropped. Who are they? I asked. Unknown affiliation, Arbiter said. However, given recent events, I believe it is reasonable to assume they represent the same interests that have been attempting to discourage your restoration efforts. I raced back up through the ship toward the bridge, my mind spinning through every possibility. Whoever had been quietly sabotaging my supply orders and sending intimidating strangers to corner me in empty corridors had apparently decided that subtlety was no longer working, and now they were coming directly for the ship itself, likely hoping to seize it, or destroy it, before the truth locked inside it could ever get out. Arbiter, can this ship even defend itself right now? I asked, breathless, as I reached the bridge and dropped into the central command chair for the first time. Partial weapons functionality has been restored, Arbiter said. However, full combat readiness remains incomplete. I estimate our current capability at roughly 40% of standard operational strength. 40% against 3 armed ships, I said. That does not sound like good odds. It is not, Arbiter agreed calmly. However, this vessel was built to exceed expectations under exactly these kinds of circumstances. I recommend we do not wait for them to reach us. Before I could ask what that meant, the ship shuddered gently beneath me as docking clamps disengaged automatically, and through the bridge's main viewport, I saw the walls of the maintenance bay sliding away as the ship began pulling itself free under its own quiet power for the first time in a generation. I did not have a full crew. I did not have anywhere near 6,000 hands to help me. I had one tired janitor sitting in a captain's chair, and a patient, ancient mind guiding me through controls I barely understood, and somehow that was going to have to be enough. The 3 approaching ships came into view on the main screen, sleek and clearly built for aggression rather than trade, closing in fast now that they saw the old wreck they had come to silence was suddenly moving under its own power. They are hailing us, Arbiter said, demanding immediate surrender of the vessel and full shutdown of all systems. Tell them, I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be, that this ship already survived one war fought by people who believed disappearing quietly was easier than standing their ground. I do not intend to make that same mistake twice. Arbiter did not respond immediately, and for a moment I worried I had said something foolish. Then, quietly, almost warmly, it answered. Message relayed, Captain, it said. For what it is worth, I believe your predecessor would have approved of that answer. The lead attacking ship opened fire first, a bright burst of energy streaking across the black toward us, and every instinct in my body screamed to brace for impact. Instead, the ship moved beneath me with a grace I could not have predicted, sliding smoothly out of the weapon's path. Using defensive systems, Arbiter engaged a fraction of a second before the shot would have connected. Evasive systems remain fully functional despite reduced power, Arbiter said. This vessel was designed to protect its crew above all else, even a crew of 1. I gripped the edges of the command chair, my heart hammering, and watched as the 2 remaining ships adjusted their approach, clearly frustrated by the unexpected agility of a ship they had assumed would be an easy, defenseless target. Arbiter, I said, can we fight back, or do we just keep dodging? Limited defensive fire is available, Arbiter said. I would recommend a targeted response designed to disable rather than destroy, consistent with this vessel's original engagement protocols. Do it, I said. Disable them. I do not want anyone else dying over this, not even them. A series of precise, controlled bursts fired from somewhere along the hull, and I watched on the display as one of the attacking ships lost power along its forward section, drifting to a slow, harmless stop. The second ship hesitated, clearly reconsidering its odds against a target that had just proven far more capable than expected. Then, without warning, the third ship, the one that had stayed back the entire time, broke away entirely and fled at full speed, abandoning its 2 companions rather than risk further engagement. The remaining ship followed moments later, apparently deciding that whatever reward waited for capturing this ship was not worth the risk of losing everything trying to take it by force. The bridge fell quiet, except for the steady hum of restored systems and my own unsteady breathing. "Threat neutralized," Arbiter said softly. "Minimal damage sustained. Congratulations, Captain, on your first successful engagement." I sat back in the chair, adrenaline slowly draining out of me, replaced by a strange, disbelieving kind of calm. A few weeks earlier, I had been mopping floors while aliens laughed at me for being human. Now I had just successfully defended a legendary warship from an ambush meant to silence it forever. "Arbiter," I said quietly, "whoever sent those ships is not going to just give up after this." "No," Arbiter agreed. "They will likely escalate, which means, Captain, that the time for staying quiet and working alone has come to an end. If the truth locked inside this vessel is ever going to matter to anyone beyond the two of us, it must be shared, deliberately, and soon, before those who fear it can bury it once more." I looked out at the stars through the main viewport, thinking about Mira Voss and her 10 years of careful, patient research, about Talia Wren and every favor she had never once complained about 6,000 empty berths and a captain who had chosen to disappear rather than surrender. "Then let us make sure they never get the chance to bury it again," I said. "It is time the whole galaxy heard exactly what this ship really is, and exactly what my people actually did." For the first time since I had bought a piece of scrap metal at a scrapyard auction, I felt something other than fear or confusion settle over me. I felt ready. I did not have time to celebrate that first small victory, because within hours of the attack, station security finally noticed the disturbance near the outer docking rings, and with them came questions I could no longer avoid answering. I contacted Mira before anyone else could reach me, and within the hour she arrived at the maintenance bay in person for the first time, standing at the base of the ship with wide, disbelieving eyes as she finally saw with her own eyes what she had spent 10 years searching for. "It is real," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "It is more than real," I said. "Come aboard. I think it is time you heard everything, straight from the source." I brought her to the bridge, and for the next several hours, Arbiter shared with her everything it had shared with me, the recovered logs, the true account of that final battle, the impossible choice made by a crew who sacrificed their names and their futures rather than let a dangerous discovery fall into careless hands. Mira listened in near total silence, occasionally asking careful questions, her hands trembling slightly as she took notes on her data slate. 10 years of quiet, patient work finally paying off in a single overwhelming night. "This changes everything," she finally said, once the recordings had ended. "Every history document, every assumption, every species in this galaxy holds about your people. If this gets out properly, verified and undeniable, it will not just clear humanity's name, it could unravel every advantage the powers who buried this truth have built on top of that false defeat for an entire generation." "Which is exactly why they tried to destroy this ship before it could ever get out," I said. "And exactly why they will try again, harder this time," Mira said grimly. She was right, of course. Word of the failed attack could not be fully contained, and within days, rumors began circulating across Kessa's Drift and beyond, distorted and wild in the way rumors always are, but carrying enough truth at their core to draw serious attention from further away than I expected. Some of that attention was dangerous. Some of it, unexpectedly, was not. It was Arbiter who first detected the incoming signal 3 days after the attack, a tight, encoded transmission using a protocol so old that most modern systems would never have recognized it at all. "Captain, you may wish to see this personally," Arbiter said, redirecting the signal to the main bridge display. The message that resolved on screen was brief, formal, and utterly unlike anything I expected. It carried an old human military seal, faded but unmistakable, along with a short verified authentication code that Arbiter confirmed matched pre-war command protocols exactly. "This vessel's activation has been detected across several long-dormant listening posts," the message read. If this signal reaches a legitimate command authority aboard, please respond using standard verification. We have been waiting a long time for this moment. I stared at that message for a long time before I found my voice again. Arbiter, I said carefully, are you telling me there are more of these listening posts, more of our people, still out there? Unknown at this time, Arbiter said, though its voice carried a note of something that might have been cautious hope. However, this transmission origin traces to coordinates well beyond currently mapped human colony space. It is possible, Captain, that not everything belonging to your species vanished during the Silence Wars. Some may simply have been waiting, exactly as this vessel waited, for the right moment to be found again. I sat with that thought for a long time, feeling something shift inside my chest that I did not have a name for yet, something between grief for everyone who had been lost and a fragile, stubborn kind of hope for everyone who might still remain. We did not have the luxury of waiting long to decide what to do next. Barely 2 days after that first strange transmission arrived, a much larger and far more organized force appeared at the edge of Kessa's drift system. 3 heavy warships bearing markings I did not recognize, broadcasting a blunt demand for the immediate surrender of, in their exact words, the recovered flagship and all recovered historical data pertaining to the Silence Wars. This was no longer a handful of hired thugs sent to intimidate a lone janitor. This was an organized power, likely one of the very interests responsible for burying the truth in the first place, arriving to finish what their earlier attempt had failed to accomplish. Arbiter, tell me the truth, I said, standing at the center of the bridge as those warships grew steadily closer on the main display. Can we survive this? Not alone, Arbiter said honestly. Even at full power, this vessel was never designed to stand against 3 heavy warships without support. Then what do we do? I asked, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. We answer that transmission, Arbiter said. And we hope, Captain, that whoever sent it meant exactly what they said. I gave the order, and Arbiter sent a full verified response back along that same old careful protocol, revealing our position, our situation, and the danger closing in around us. Then we waited, watching those 3 warships grow larger on the display with every passing minute, weapons systems clearly active, giving us no illusions about what would happen if help did not arrive in time. Help arrived with less than 4 minutes to spare. Long-range sensors first picked up the disturbance as a strange shimmer at the very edge of detection range, and then, one after another, ships began emerging from what Arbiter identified as a concealment technology far beyond anything currently known to exist in the wider galaxy, ships bearing the same faded but unmistakable markings as the flagship beneath my own feet. They kept emerging, 5 ships, then 10, then more than I could easily count, arranging themselves smoothly between the approaching warships and my own small, battered vessel like they had trained for this exact moment for years, waiting only for a signal that finally told them it was safe to come home. A new transmission arrived moments later, this one carrying a voice rather than text, calm, measured, and carrying an unmistakable weight of authority that made the whole bridge feel suddenly much smaller. "This is Commander Elara Finch of the Remnant Fleet," the voice said. "To the vessel broadcasting under old flagship command protocols, please confirm your identity and the status of your commanding officer." I looked at Arbiter, feeling suddenly very small and very unqualified for whatever was about to happen, and then I straightened my shoulders and answered anyway. "This is Dax Marin," I said. "I am not a military officer. I am a station janitor who happened to buy an old wreck at auction and found out it still had a heartbeat. But I am standing at her command chair, and I am not planning on surrendering her or the truth she carries to anyone." There was a pause on the other end of that channel, long enough that I worried I had said entirely the wrong thing. Then Commander Finch's voice returned, and this time it carried something that sounded, unmistakably, like quiet relief. "Then you are exactly the kind of officer this fleet was always meant to find," she said. "Hold your position, Captain Marin. We have waited a long time for this ship, and we are not about to let anyone take her from us now." The battle that followed, was sharp, fast, and mercifully brief. Faced with a suddenly overwhelming force they had never anticipated, the three warships that had come to silence one small ship and one small truth chose retreat over destruction, fleeing back into the dark, far faster than they had arrived. Arbiter's systems tracked their withdrawal with something that almost sounded like satisfaction in its careful, patient voice. In the hours that followed, as officers from the remnant fleet came aboard for the first time in a generation, walking those long, empty corridors, with expressions I will never fully forget, I learned that humanity had never truly disappeared at all. Scattered ships and hidden outposts had spent decades quietly rebuilding, waiting, exactly as Arbiter had waited, for a sign that it was finally safe to reveal themselves again. My old, battered flagship, the one everyone had assumed was worthless scrap, turned out to be the very signal they had been listening for the entire time. Mira's careful research, combined with Arbiter's fully unlocked archive and the living testimony of an entire fleet that had never truly vanished, finally broke the false history that had defined my species for a generation. It did not happen instantly, and it did not happen without resistance from those who had built their power on the old lie. But truth, once it has enough witnesses behind it, has a way of refusing to stay buried forever. I stood on the bridge many months later, no longer a tired station janitor pushing a cleaning cart through corridors where nobody bothered to learn my name. I stood as captain of a fully restored flagship, surrounded by a growing crew of humans who had finally come home, looking out at stars that our species was, at long last, ready to reach for again. "Arbiter," I said quietly, watching the fleet gathering slowly around us like a family finally reunited after a very long separation. "We did not lose that war after all, did we?" "No, Captain," Arbiter said, and for the first time, its voice carried something unmistakably like pride. "You never did. You simply had to wait for someone brave enough to come looking for the truth, even in a wreck nobody else believed was worth saving." I looked out at that gathering fleet, at a species everyone had underestimated finally standing tall again, and allowed myself, for the very first time since that laughing auction room, to genuinely smile. "Let them underestimate us again," I said softly. "We will be ready this time."